In this interview, I talked to Aki Balogh. He's the co-founder of MarketMuse, and now he's the president. We get into many things. This is a very long conversation. We hear about his start and how he navigated his way into a sort of a position where he could start MarketMuse. Then we hear about growing the company and bringing on more folks. We also get into some of the specific use cases and how you might want to use MarketMuse. There are several different ways you could use MarketMuse, and there's a few specific flows that work particularly well for the kind of content that you and I probably write. Then we hear about some of the things on the horizon, new things for MarketMuse coming up. And we actually spend a lot of time on the AI portion and some of the cool technology that MarketMuse is really on the cutting edge of AI and content. You can check out MarketMuse. I am an affiliate, so if you sign up using my link, I get a commission, which I very much appreciate. It helps me bring you interviews and shows like this. Without further ado, let's hear from Aki Balogh. Hey Aki, how's it going today?
Hey, Doug. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm pumped, and it's been pretty cool to chat with you sort of off the record a couple of times already. And for the people that don't know you, can you give a little intro on yourself and what you do over at MarketMuse?
Sure. I co-founded MarketMuse, and currently serve as our president. So I run our partner program, look at essentially strategic partnerships, corporate uh, agency partnerships, we're looking at our affiliate program or referral program. So any kind of partner where we can basically take our data and do large scale integrations, writing network partnerships. So I oversee all that. But prior to this, I served as our CEO for 4.5 years. And prior to that, I was our founding CTO. So I tend to tell my friends that I've played every role in this company except for marketing. I haven't done marketing, but maybe I get some points because we're in marketing.
I think it counts. And what does MarketMuse do for the people that haven't heard of it before?
Yes, so we're an AI content intelligence and publishing platform. So we have solutions around data solutions, around competitive analysis, understanding your topics and your pages and the quality and the strength of each, understanding your topical authority on a domain level. So there's a lot of intel and research you can do. And then there are AI publishing features. So we can use AI to build you content outlines. Given a topic, how would you write effectively to cover that concept? How would you optimize your existing content? And we have a new product that uses AI to actually generate a draft of the content we call first draft. So we have AI natural language generation as well.
Okay, breaking a lot of ground, and you gave me a lot to unpack here. I do want to go back sort of to like the origins of MarketMuse and your background a little bit too. So did you come right out of school and you jumped onto MarketMuse? How did you get into this area of the world here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to rewind the clock 35 years, I was born in Hungary in a smaller town called Debrecen. My father was a scientist. My mother was a PhD teacher, PhD candidate in teaching and Hungarian Russian literature. So but in 1990, times were tough. We came to the U.S. to the Boston area, and essentially I taught myself to code when I was 13, or depending on what I wouldn't count basic. I guess Elon Musk counts basic. So he started at 9. I started at 10 with basic, but 13 with a proper language Perl. Then went to, instead of high school, went to community college, undergrad in business after that in Michigan. And then I went into management consulting, where we essentially worked with Fortune 500s and used their data to give them insights. So, for example, when AIG took a big hit and had to get bailed out by the federal government, we helped their board of directors understand the quality of their insurance operations in 140 countries. and we helped them figure out which markets should they invest in or divest from and why. And we did that using statistical models. We had a team in China, I'm sorry, a team in India that essentially would run the numbers, and on the US side, we'd frame up the analyses. So those were the types of projects we did. I then went to a venture fund called OpenView, where I was their first associate looking at AI and big data. And essentially the founder of the fund pulled me aside and said, hey, you should be an entrepreneur and like build something and get some experience. And so I left, went to another startup where we made data software for big data. And we also did content marketing to drive leads. And we worked with Tech Target, which is how I met Jeff, my co-founder. And basically all of that really long monologue and gets us to actual MarketMuse, which is I wanted to create an AI company that helps society in some way. And I actually started in healthcare for a couple of months. And then some of my mentors sat me down and said, hey, man, for your first one, don't do healthcare. It's way too hard. Got regulation, the sales model's hard. It's just going to be insane. Do something a little bit easier. And so I thought to do MarTech, but I did not want to do advertising because it's a fine business. I wanted something that helps society a little bit more. And I didn't like that advertising is interruptive by design, whereas content is educational, it's informational, it's something that I just felt good about socially as well. So I started and essentially want to build an AI platform. And I realized that there wasn't really an AI platform for content. All the SEO platforms were basically BI systems where they show you what you're ranking for and what keywords, but there was nothing that was predictive, that was content focused, that was focused on the workflows of a content strategist. And so I decided to just see how far we can take it. And that in late 2013, I got started on this.
Wow. When you first started coding, when you said you were 8 or 9, it sounded like, what was that first computer? Just curious.
Oh, great question. Well, I learned to type on a Commodore 64 that we had at home, but that was just playing games. And yeah, the first computer at our school, well, let's see, we had a Mac. I think not. It might have been a Lisa, it might have been I think something, whatever it was back then, Mac Pro, or I forget what it was. Power, I don't know, Power Mac. That's what it. We had a Power Mac. So I started on that, and then we had a computer at school that was probably also a Mac. So I started on BASIC. But BASIC, Elon Musk actually sold a game he built in BASIC. I didn't have nearly that level of skill. But later, when I got into Perl and regular expressions, that's when I started to really understand what computers can do. And then at 15, I started this high school college thing where I learned C++ and kind of went from there.
Okay. And you had a business degree or certificate or something like that at the community college. Did you get some CS training as well, or?
It was a CS 2-year associate's degree at the community college, and I graduated at 18, and then I went to business undergrad at Michigan and got my BBA there.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, when I hit regular expressions, it was amazing. It's really cool. If people don't know what we're talking about, you could go down the rabbit hole, but it's pretty fun once you figure out all the things you could do. It's really like a foreign language when you first see it. When it sounded like one of the partners, when you were first an associate, pulled you aside and said, you should go do your own thing. What do you think he saw in you that made him give you that advice and say, hey, you probably want to get out of here?
Well, I guess in a good and bad way, he saw that I wasn't a fit with their investment team, which turned out okay, I guess. But I actually moved from New York to Boston for this job. So essentially, I left out a step because I didn't want to be too boring. But when I left management consulting, I went to work for a search fund, which is basically a small private equity fund where you look to make one acquisition, and so you search and search for years to find the right acquisition. So I was working with two Stanford GSB graduated private equity operator people, and I got excited. I wanted to learn about finance and M&A that way. And so when I got the job, I was actually looking for jobs in New York, but my parents moved to Boston. So I started looking at Boston, found the job at OpenView. Within 30 minutes, I was invited in for an interview, had two interviews, and boom, I got the job. But I didn't actually meet Scott Maxwell, who's the founder there. We just kind of rushed the interview process. So I didn't meet him and some of his partners. And so when I actually arrived in Boston, I got set up with my apartment, all the things you have to do, got into work. And my first conversation with Scott, first time I met him, we talked about product and how understanding your product is the most important, it's really important in tech. It's arguably the most important skill, understanding on a very detailed level. And Scott had done years ago, had done a PhD at MIT in robotics. And so he felt we had that common ground. And so we had that first conversation, and he came back to me a week later and said, "Hey, Aki, I really appreciate knowing you. I don't think you should be here. I don't think you should be in an investing role. You're like a product person. You should be building a company, either yours or somebody else's. And you're welcome here for a while, but you really shouldn't be here because I want you to be happy and successful." And I'm like, okay. And then a week later, my managing director, Adam, pulled me aside and he's like, "Hey, maybe you should be at a startup. It's a really good time to raise seed funding. You could build something." I'm like, wow, what is with you guys? Like, I literally just got here, settled in. So I ended up being there for 9 months. I sourced the deal for them, Spreadfast, which they put 18 million in for Series, I don't know, B or C. So that turned out fine. So I feel like I paid my obligations there, paid my dues, but eventually I found this other company, InfinityDB, and their CEO invited me to join, and I joined them, and that's how I guess became a tech operator.
Got it. Okay. And then you met up with Jeff because you were working on some common stuff, and this is Jeff Coyle, your co-founder, who, interesting fact, he and I both went to Georgia Tech around the same time, and it's highly likely we walked past each other because we both had CS classes and kind of that area of the campus and all that. So very small world. So you met up with Jeff and you realized that you were doing a little similar work or you had similar interests. So take us from there.
Yeah, so I actually started working on this on MarketMuse late 2018, but 2013. But I met Jeff in 2014, and he became my co-founder and joined end of 2015. So it actually took 2 years for that to play out. But the company that I was at before MarketMuse, InfinityDB. So when I left OpenView, I went to a big data company called InfinityDB, and we did content syndication. And our most successful channel was TechTarget. So I didn't know much about that business, but I knew that whatever TechTarget's doing, it works pretty well for lead gen. And 3 years later, when I met Jeff, he was the VP of search at TechTarget. He found me, found the site and said, "Wow, this is really interesting. Tell me more." And meanwhile, I nearly fell out of my chair because I'm like, my gosh, the head of search at TechTarget, he really gets this stuff. And I know their solution works. So Jeff actually joined end of October 2015 or beginning of October 2015. And that's when we basically started building out MarketMuse as we know it today. I essentially between September 2013 and October 2015, I was just building the API building our technology and just finding early customers. And so by the time Jeff joined, we had maybe, 10 customers, and then he took it to 20, and then now we have thousands.
Wow. When you were working on it on your own, was it just on the side and you still had your day job, full-time gig?
I left my job. Basically, InfinityDB, I was on the business side for 2 years there. and I really just wanted to get back into coding. So I left my job. Technically, I got fired, which is fine. It wasn't my fault. It's just the company was declining, and we had a lot of issues due to some historical stuff nobody really cares about, but the company was declining. A couple people and I tried to save the ship, but it was just too far, too gone. And so they fired people so that we can also qualify for unemployment. So essentially had transitioned, had settled into kind of figuring out my next thing, and I had unemployment buying me some time. So I basically just sat down and relearned coding. I mean, at that time, I had been away from coding for 8 years. So I had to learn Python, which is kind of table stakes for this type of stuff, Scala, Go, concurrency, asynchronous network stuff, data movement, whatever, ORMs. I mean, I'm just throwing stuff out there. Front end coding. I've never done front end, so I had to learn MVC framework. It was just Angular, Ruby. I mean, it was just one thing after the other. So that took 2 years to learn all that stuff and to implement the system and to find early customers and to essentially create this category. That took 2 years. And so when Jeff joined, it was already kind of and also to create some buzz around it, PR, et cetera. So we do some data journalism to prove that it actually worked. So by the time Jeff joined, it was kind of an ongoing concern. It was very, very, very small, but it was an established thing.
And you had some customers, so you knew people were interested in it and they wanted the product. What did Jeff bring to the table that you didn't have, or I'll leave it at that. Yeah, what did Jeff bring to the table? Because he has a tech background too, so he didn't necessarily need two coders, one would think, but I don't know.
Yeah, Jeff brought a lot. I mean, we would not be anywhere where we are today. We probably wouldn't even exist without Jeff joining at that time. So I think my lucky stars to this day that we met. And I think he feels the same about me. But he was the sales and the industry expert and the practitioner. He had done these workflows and these processes manually in his team. He had built a 30-something person, 35-person team at TechTarget to optimize content and do a whole bunch of other stuff. And so he knew the manual way of doing it, but he recognized that the data feed and the system that I had designed was able to automate almost all of it. And we could build a SaaS platform that had never been done before anywhere, that he had always wanted to have, over the years of just understanding the pain points. So his understanding of the pain points, his network with the SEO community has been great. He does a lot of webinars and there's a lot of education. Talking to Jeff is just like getting insights from the Oracle directly. So it's just all of that. Plus, he's a really good enterprise salesperson. So he really helped us increase our deal size, and he's a great remote manager. So he's been remote for many years, I think over 10 years at this point, like me, but he had a lot of experience building and managing a team remotely. At that time, I didn't at all, really. So he helped me navigate a lot of the leadership challenges, culture, just all the things you have to do. And then on my end, I kept writing code and being the CTO. Jeff was the chief product officer at the time. I was our CTO, so I was running the engineering team and doing a lot of strategic stuff, fundraising, product strategy. Although Jeff was really the lead strategist, but how can we take this data and just make use of it in the broader world? That's that kind of I would say product market fit. Seeking product market fit was my main goal and still is today.
Were there any assumptions that you guys made early on about what the product would do or what the customers would want the product to do that were just kind of off?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we made so many assumptions that turned out to be off, but we also made a lot that turned out to be okay. So right at the get-go, I wasn't sure if it'll be an SEO content use case or a PPC AdWords use case. So I experimented in both, and we tried to build this is actually before Jeff, I tried to build a PPC keyword finder based on semantically relevant kind of broad match, phrase match type keywords. That didn't really go anywhere, which is fine. So that was a misstep. When we first went over the years, we had a couple of learnings around packaging, how people like to or can consume the data, because the reality is this type of data can serve millions of individual users and very small businesses, but it also is incredibly powerful in the hands of very large companies. So we've kind of danced on both sides of that line. And we had customers that way, but then we realized, or we ran into a lot of usability challenges. A lot of the larger customers weren't able to just kind of get the big picture. They had to still do a lot of things manually. So Jeff and Noah, who's our CTO, really spearheaded building a platform where you can do full end-to-end content planning and research. That was called the MarketMuse Suite. That was launched August 2018. So 3 years after Jeff joined. So in those 3 years, we essentially used the data from the self-serve tools and applications to basically build these large content strategies by hand. I think in 2016, end of 2016, we built the world's first AI content plan. And it was just a purely AI generated set of scores and suggestions and where you're strong, where you're weak for a site. And so that was our biggest milestone. So that was late 2016. And then it took 2 years for us to put that into a platform where anybody can buy it. And then we switched, that kind of swung us over to the larger deal size enterprise format. And then last year we swung the pendulum back, and now we basically can sell both, but we certainly have a lot of self-serve and easily accessible options. So just dancing on both sides of that was a really big learning of the last 5-7 years.
Got it. For this, the swing back where essentially the price is lower, right? That's what you mean. The price is lower and people can sign up that maybe they don't have a team of 20 writers and it's just smaller companies, right?
Price is one aspect that obviously people notice, but it's really the packaging format. Think of before, in the beginning, we sold very small cars. Then we switched to trucks, but not everybody needs or can afford a truck, or the truck won't even fit in your driveway, the long, semi trucks, 24-foot U-Hauls, whatever those things are. And now we have a bunch of different cars at various levels, including long haul, shipping and short, short things. So it's really, it's a set of configurations that a large volume of people can buy the simple configurations, and then a small number of very high value companies can buy the full-on suite with everything that we do.
Was it challenging early on because MarketMuse was basically the first tool that was doing the things that it can do? So was it hard to convince the early customers what you were trying to do, or did they see the value right away?
It was incredibly challenging because what we were doing was, when I sat down with it, and I work with a scientist, Richard Mala, he and I own our patent, our core patent. But when we sat down, we wanted to model content in this scientifically the best way possible and use some novel approaches and novel algorithms to do that, which we accomplished. But then I would go to marketers and say, hey, I can model your topics. And they're like, well, what's the topic? I have keywords. I track my keywords, but what's the topic? And I'm like, well, it's like this. Well, but doesn't that look like a keyword? well, it's a little different because it's a little bit higher level, and it was just, and they're like, is that a theme? And I'm like, what's a theme? And so there's a lot of confusion because back in 2014 nobody was doing this. I mean, nobody was doing this other than there was like one post on it. I think the first time I found a post on topic wasn't even called topical authority. It was just like, hey guys, like I look at content this way. It was, I mean, it was, I can count on one hand the number of people thinking about this. So I actually got pretty lucky. I mean, this is not, we didn't sign, I'm not under NDA, so I think I can talk about this. Is back in end of 2014, I had been working on this thing for a year, and I met Rand Fishkin, who at the time was at Moz. And I actually reached out to Rand and said, hey, Rand, I have this content scoring topic modeling thing. And he's like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. Let's partner. And so we tried to work out a partnership with Moz, which eventually fell apart, and Moz just changed a lot of the strategy, and Rand left, and etc. But at the time, there was a lot of desire to kind of make this work and plug it into Moz Analytics. And as a side effect of that, Rand started talking about it. And that was great because that started because Rand already saw the vision that this is the way to do SEO. From an on-page perspective, you want to look at your topic clusters, but nobody else really understood that early on. Brian Dean did. So we did a post a long time ago and kind of a data journalism thing. So he got it. Eric Van Busker, who was at SEMrush, but now he runs an agency out of Vietnam. So he got it, but it was like, and Jeff Coyle got it, but it was just a couple of people. So just explaining what it is and why it matters without having the full technology platform back in, 7 years ago, that was hard. That was really hard.
Yeah. And you hear about being, first to the market. Obviously, you have a big advantage, but you also are responsible for the education so people know they need the thing that you have.
Yes.
And I'm part of the problem with a keyword, favoring keywords over topics or topic clusters and that sort of thing. So how do you differentiate the two? So what's the difference between a keyword and a topic?
It's pretty simple. We actually call keywords variants in our system to help differentiate. But essentially, a keyword is, most people think of it as, it's a search query. It's something you type into Google, and there's an intent behind it. The intent's actually really important because you can put the word bat in, and it has multiple intents. Not only is it baseball bat or an animal, but it's, where do I find one? Where do I buy one? Is there a bat in the zoo nearby? There's so many intents. So you're actually trying to get to the intent behind it. But basically, a keyword or a variant is just a specific instance of a search query, and the topic is the concept behind it that you're trying to understand, and intent is essentially what you're trying to do with it. And so we track all of them separately now.
And they work well together. It's great to have an understanding of both of them, I suspect. And you're nodding, so do you agree?
Yes.
Anything to add to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can, for example, our business is about content strategy. We're about a number of topics, but content strategy is one of the core things we're about. How to build it, how to understand it, how to use automation, etc., how to scale it up. And then the different keywords, there are thousands of keywords that tie into those. And there are a couple of intents. Do you want to research? It's basically the funnel. Do you want to know something? You want to learn about it? Are you considering different ways of doing content strategy or different solutions or should I do a spreadsheet or do it in Screaming Frog or should do a MarketMuse? So there's the different levels of it. So it's basically a number of topics your business is about applied through a number of intent filters and instantiated in thousands or hundreds of thousands of keywords for on those topics. So it's a way to group things.
Got it. And we'll spend a little bit more time just on sort of the origin, and then we'll move into actually what the heck do you do with MarketMuse and some of the use cases. So before we move on, though, I know that MarketMuse took on some funding and has some investors. So why make that decision versus, just bootstrapping it and maybe keeping it simpler? Yeah, why did you make that decision?
Absolutely. When I started MarketMuse, I actually bootstrapped for 2 years. I basically didn't take pay. I'd mentioned my unemployment that I was working through, also used up my savings, but I didn't take money because I didn't want to. I wanted to have control to the maximal extent possible, because at that time I recognized that we have a tremendous opportunity. It's a huge market. We have a novel product that's just going to get better and better over time as we build the AI out. And I looked 10 years ahead, and I recognize that there will be a day when my influence will be necessary to solve some sort of blocker, some sort of investor who's pushing back, maybe take advantage of an opportunity. And so I wanted just to own most of it at that time, because I didn't know how the next years were going to work out. And I just wanted to be able to, at the end of the day, just make a call on, if we need to give someone more shares, I can do it. If we need to right a wrong, I basically wanted to have the ability to right a wrong. So, and I knew that in the very early days, if you raise a seed round or pre-seed, any money you raise is just going to really dilute that control. So at the time, in the first 2 years, I wanted to be an autocrat. When Jeff joined, and then as we built out the company, I moved away from that because I wanted to have the best people in the world who are on these topics. So we want to find the best people in the world, bring them all into one place, and then give them skin in the game so that they all feel very, very much they are more motivated because they know that the work that they do today in X number of years is going to be huge, and both financially and from just that feeling of ownership is you're going to have a part of it. But secondly, I just recognize that I'll have limitations. So there are a lot of things that I'm not good at. I mean, really only good at maybe one or two things. And by bringing in the best people and just connecting them and getting them motivated, it's just a cool journey. It's just something that we can all be proud of. And I wasn't sure who's going to be involved, and how it will evolve. But I wanted to make it an organization and not just something that springs from my brain. And also, not to mention, if I get hit by a truck or something were to happen to me, I didn't want it to end. But in the early days, I recognized that our market size is huge. So I did an analysis. I found that there are 5 million people in the US who create content for business writing. That was my number, and that's big enough. So I wanted to essentially just take a 10-15 year view and just map that journey. And so in the early days, we did not take funding. We took a little bit of angel funding because it turns out we needed to hire more and more engineers and more sales, and we needed some money to do all that. But so in the first 2 years, I took nothing, just 10-20,000 from my brother, and one angel investor. I think 25K is very small. And then in the next 2 years, we took about $1 million, and this is all on Crunchbase, but we took about $1 million just to fund more development. And then in the last 2-3 years, we've taken another 10. We've taken over 10 million now through just in the last 3 years.
Wow, pretty amazing. And I guess I wonder, was it hard to give up some of the control that you had, or just the way that you explained it? It sounds like you understood the trade-offs, but I know letting go of control seems like a big thing.
Not to me. Not. Luckily, it's always come second nature. Some people I know have a struggle with it, especially when they're larger and larger amounts of money. It's kind of like, you feel that you always wonder, could I have done better, etc. But I feel really good about all the deals we've struck. I mean, we've raised money now in terms of venture rounds. We've had 5, some of them small, but we've had 5 different rounds. And then before then, I think I brought on maybe 15 angels. So that was 15 individual negotiations. So we've gone through dozens and dozens of negotiations. And it really, I just recognize when somebody is better at something than I am. And I think it's the end. At the end of the day, what can you do? I'd love to be the single best person at everything, but I know that I'm basically not the best person at almost everything. I'm a terrible, I don't stand, my skills are much worse than our engineers in terms of engineering. I don't stand, don't hold a candle to any of our engineers' performance in their craft. I'm not great at sales. I'm not great at marketing. Certainly not good at so many other things. I'm definitely not a great manager. I'd love to be a better one. It's not that I feel bad about it. It's just I'm just realistic. And so when you recognize raw talent, or not even raw, when you recognize talent, it's just easy to get motivated and want that person to work with you, and you want them to be rewarded. Because my number one guiding principle was, when I look back in the future, 10, 15 years in the future, I did not want to regret anything. I didn't want to feel like I screwed somebody over, or I wanted it to feel like a positive development growth experience. And so far so good. We have not, to my knowledge, we have not screwed anyone over. And if we have, please email me, because we want to right all our wrongs in the, when accidents happen, I guess. But we've done all of that. So that really gets to, and I'll stop talking about this in such detail, but 2-3 months ago, I gave up the CEO title, because Chuck Freidenborg, who was at the time our chief revenue officer, I just saw that he was going to be a fantastic CEO. The areas where he's strong, leadership, general management, a sales-focused culture. We need to we build great products. Now we need to build out the revenue and the go-to-market channel, which is hard. All of those were strengths of his. And so when the idea came that he could be the CEO, for me, it was like an immediate, yes, if you want the job, you got it, and I will gladly work for you. And that was just 3 months ago, but it's just worked out really well. Even over that amount of time, Chuck has really worked wonders here.
And yeah, what's the big difference, I was going to ask you, between your role now as president versus what it was as CEO?
A lot. So I still am involved in strategic thinking, and I actually have a sales quota, which has been fun to just get in and where the rubber meets the road and actually move product. It's been really a good opportunity. And then I focus on partnerships and sort of the bigger picture around partnerships. It just takes a lot of time to think through those things and to set up those relationships, and they're very slow. So I've been very fortunate to focus on that. But Chuck does typical CEO things I used to do. He runs all the departments, the teams. He focuses on culture and on vision and on HR stuff and people and talent stuff and empowering leaders and managers and coaching and training and managing the board. So he has a lot of investors who are really, really smart, but they need to be managed. And then there are legal and tax and financial issues and hitting our KPIs and performance management. So he's excellent at those general management pieces. And that freed, and by the way, meanwhile, Jeff moved to chief strategy officer. So I'm focused on our partner program. Jeff focuses on our strategy as a company, and Chuck runs the company. And it's been just, along with our co-owners, our investors and our board and our employees. And that has been just a winning, just an amazing combination, actually.
I want to go back and highlight something you said a minute ago about just having the best people, really talented folks, and a lot of people feel threatened to actually hire people that are better than them or smarter or more effective in certain areas. So compliments to you for seeing that it's maybe a better way to hire people that are better than you, fill those gaps, and they'll do a better job than you at certain things. And then, of course, you could focus on what you're best at. So that's great.
Yeah, it feels good to know something. My father always says it feels good to know something. It's painful or hard to learn something. And so I just never wanted to get into a position where I assume that what I know is the best way to do it. It's tempting. So there's this dynamic in entrepreneurship, rich versus king. There's a book that covers it by Noam Wasserman. But essentially, do you want to be the king, the ruler, the absolute power? Businesses are essentially dictatorships. And do you want to be the key dictator and the person that everybody looks up to? Or do you want to be really, really successful as a business? And the only way to do the latter, I would argue, is to take on investors and so on. Eventually, you don't have to do it at any given point, but the more brains you put around a problem, if the brains are brilliant, you'll have a much better solution. And so that's that dynamic that requires you to reduce your ego as much as possible. And I'd like to keep just getting better at that, because there are times, I mean, yesterday I made a mistake with a communication internally. I put too much ego into it. Your ego, my ego, nothing matters. The only thing that matters, did this thing work for the customer? Is it working? Is it delivering value? Does it work? And how well does it work? And the better it works, that's the only thing. And people who are ego driven, and we all have egos. I have a huge ego, of course. Everyone does in entrepreneurship, but people who are motivated by ego, they run out of, just borrowing from complexity theory, they run out of maximum complexity. So if you have a decision maker at the top, and the military discovered this because they had these strict hierarchies, and they've changed that to more team of teams and more collaborative structures. If you have a strict hierarchy, the single decision maker at the top, the entire system is limited to the maximum complexity of that person. And that's not going to scale out well, because the world, we're in very complex places. So if you actually give up that king or queen title and just let the complexity of the system guide things, and you set values and guiding principles, and you make sure that people are following the rules and adhering to those, but the system can actually form and become more complex than you could have ever imagined, which is what happened with MarketMuse. I never imagined 7 years ago that we'd have all this stuff that we have now. And what we have is quite complicated. There are different packaging formats and customers and use cases, and so, but I could not come up with this stuff myself. It would have been a much more limited version. And that's what Jeff brought in a big way. And then all the other people we've added over the years have really increased the maximum complexity of what we do, which is great, because I use the word complexity as kind of a bad thing, but it's really sophistication.
Got it. And before we move on to using MarketMuse and maybe some of the workflows a person might go through, is there anything else interesting that I didn't ask you about related to starting the company and growing it to where you guys are today?
I think the biggest milestone for me, another thing that made a big difference, is when I moved from Boston to New York. And I like Boston. There are a lot of smart people there. There are great investors there. But in our space, in marketing tech, when I moved we tried to raise some money in Boston. Sometimes we were able to, sometimes we didn't hit our goal. We had some frustrations. But when I moved from Boston to New York, just the world opened up for me, because this system, speaking of complexity and networks, the networks in MarTech SaaS in New York are much more sophisticated than Boston. Boston doesn't really focus on MarTech as much. I can only think of a couple. HubSpot obviously is one, but I can't think of so many. SEMrush actually moved their headquarters there, but they're really a Russian company. I was just reading their S1. They're like 700 employees in Russia out of 900. So they're really, and there's a lot of cultural stuff there. But New York, you have the ad tech world. You've got the DoubleClick kind of dynasty and the people who came out of that. You just have so much. And so when I came here, I really felt that I just connected to this bigger world. And I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the reasons that I wanted to raise funding was not just to get money to fuel kind of what we know we need to do, but also to get different perspectives and different strategies and to de-risk. And so moving to New York, I met a bunch of investors who had built companies in ad tech and martech spaces, and they understood the value in a different way and a more nuanced way than my limited understanding. And they shared that as co-owners once they invested. So it's really helped us just get out into the world.
Got it. Okay. Moving into actually using MarketMuse, and my audience is mostly content site owners. So a lot of times it's affiliate marketing along with display ads and maybe a portfolio of sites. And there's a lot of folks with just one site or they're getting started. So can you take us through kind of the workflow of, an audience member that has an affiliate site, and you could pick an example, you could pick a niche, something that you're interested in, so you can come up with some good examples and maybe walk us through some of the different pieces that they would use in MarketMuse.
Yes. So our entry level functionality that anyone can use for free is if you go to marketmuse.com, you sign up, you get 10 queries. Right now it's 7, but it's about to be 10 queries in our page level applications. The most common use case is optimize. So given an article and a topic you want to optimize around, you put that in, you click the button, and you get an outline showing you how would you write to have the most comprehensive article on that topic. How would an expert writing about that topic naturally write? And then we basically score your content and say, your content hits on some of those things, but there are other pieces that are either not mentioned at all or are not mentioned enough. And by the way, here's the competitive landscape on the top 20 in Google, and here's how you compare to that. So the entry level use case is an topic by topic comparison. It's a page level comparison. And I don't say article by article because you can actually take an article and optimize against multiple topics. So it's a single topic or a single intent that you use to improve that article. And then it scales out from there in terms of domain level. So analyzing your domain and all the topics and pages and everything that you're about and showing you where you have opportunity on a domain level. And then the AI publishing stuff where you're actually, okay, how do I write all this content I now want to write? So those are the 3 main use cases. But for an affiliate site owner, it can be anything from researching a space, because in this so one of the things that gets me real excited in this competitive analysis, when you look at the Google top 20 and we score everything, we generate an average competitive content score and a target. And so you can use that to find niches that are underrepresented from a topical authority standpoint that you could grow into and actually dominate or build great content in. So essentially it helps, instead of just doing keyword research based on from a volume perspective, you can really do competitive research and find opportunities from a content quality perspective, which for content site owners obviously is very impactful.
And I'm going to try and restate it to make sure I understand, and then maybe you could pepper in a couple other details. So if I put in a topic, the top 20 results in Google would be analyzed in some fashion. There's some data behind MarketMuse that supports that, I take it. And then you would get information about what you would need to include in your article or what you would need to add to your article so that everything's covered. Is that kind of what's happening?
Yes. Basically, MarketMuse is analyzing the deep web, tens of thousands of pages on the topic that you've selected. So basically, what's on the internet on this in general, and what is of the things on the internet, what has been covered in the Google top 20 and what has been covered in your article and what has not. So the reason I mention this competitive space is you can actually look at different niches and figure out which niche you want to play in based on the topical level of competition. So if something's really well executed, maybe you don't focus on that, but there are all these niches that you could actually focus your content creation on that are going to give you more benefit faster.
Perfect. So there might be a niche or set of topics that there's content about on the internet, but the level of expertise is fairly low. So
Yes.
that indicates a sort of a void that you could fill.
Yes, absolutely. And I've done just a little. We haven't published on this, but I've just done a little digging the other day, and I found that on average, the quality of content on Google top 10, top 20 could be about 30% better, based compared to what we've suggested as the target, based on what our analysis of the broader web has found, that about a third of the information available on a topic that should be on those top results is not in there. So the quality of the top pages on Google is not good enough. And if you write a great article there, you're going to do really, really well and generate a lot of inbound, relevant inbound traffic.
If someone wants to do this, how would they be able to tell that there's a void in a particular niche? How does that manifest itself in the metrics within MarketMuse?
Yeah, so you go to our compete application, you put in the topic you're researching, and you look at, and it spits out the top 20 and scores them, and it spits out the average and the target. And if those numbers are low, so let's say out of 100, because we measure out of 100 points, if the average is below 30 and the target is 35, 40, that means that there are a lot of things that have not been covered in that SERP, and that's a clear opportunity. And when you research something, credit cards or something that is covered pretty well, those numbers tend to be in the 60s and 70s. So if I haven't done this, but if I were to look at a personal loan, get a payday loan, something like that, somebody's probably written a really comprehensive article, maybe on deck, or somebody who lends in those spaces would have covered it. But most searchers don't have that level of coverage. And so 60, 70 is high at the moment. Over time, it'll get higher and higher. But right now, 60, 70 is high, and 30, 35, under 40 is fairly low.
Got it. So in the Compete app, a person can check to see what the target is for that topic and then what the average is for the top 20.
Yes.
Got it. I'm going to be able to sell your product for you now. You can put me on the sales team. I'm starting to understand. Okay.
Well, join our affiliate program.
That is a topic that is coming up. So back to some of the apps. I know the classic example that I think about in the first area that I played in MarketMuse when I logged on was in Optimize. So in a lot of cases, someone has a website, there's quite a bit of content. Maybe we didn't optimize it properly the first time, or we just want to take a look. How does a person use Optimize? And do you have any, I didn't tell you to prep for this, but do you have any case study results or any kind of metric that we can understand what kind of change someone can see by going through and using Optimize for a piece of content?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, I tell folks that our customers see a 2 to 8x lift in traffic within the first year if they optimize their content through MarketMuse. There's actually two levels of doing that. You can use the optimized application, or you can use the scaled up version, content briefs. We have optimized briefs that give you a much more detailed answer. But essentially, you pick a page and a topic, and you build a knowledge graph in MarketMuse. We go to the web, we download a bunch of content, we build this outline, and use that outline to inform the edits and the additions you want to make to that article based on, it's just basically shows you your blind spots, and then you fill your blind spots, and that will that's then optimized content. And so that's our most popular use cases. People just go through all their articles and optimize on all their topics, and it kind of gives you that competitive level. So, right now this article is 25 points content score, but you want to get a content score of 45 to do a good job. And so it guides you, how to do that.
Perfect. And you said 2 to 8 times over the course of a year, a person might see a lot more traffic.
That's if the system is used well, and just optimizing for individual keywords all day, that may or may not get you there. You've got to be strategic on what you're doing. So it's not a panacea, but if you actually go through and you map out your content, and you map to the intents, and you think strategically about the topics, and you look for areas where you can win, and et cetera, yes, yeah, you stand to gain on average 2 to 8. Some customers see 15x. We had one customer, we published a case study on tomorrow's sleep. They got 100x gain in a year, which is huge. They went from 4,000, it's a small base, but not a tiny base, 4,000 inbounds a month turned to 400,000 inbounds a month through this. An agency helped them with that as well. But all of those are possible. And if you're a large company, or if you are dominant in a SERP, it really can help you firm up your dominance and leverage the power that you have. If you're a small company or a niche player like we are, then, for example, we're dominant in the term content strategy. We built the content strategy on content strategy, obviously. So we've been working on it for a while, but you can really own your niche, which if you're a smaller company, that could be you could get enough leads to just power a sales team and just grow organically that way. So it really is just a smarter way to research and build out your go-to-market channel with an inbound, from an inbound perspective.
What piece and functionality in MarketMuse do you really like that you think is either underappreciated or underused and would be really powerful for the users?
I think, well, compete is really powerful because people are familiar with Optimize, and they're pretty familiar with compete, but just the research capability in compete is something that I think about a lot even today. And then we have our inventory system. So essentially we analyze domains, and we look at all the pages and topics and all the competitive landscapes and everything. And we bubble it up, and we give you a prediction on where are you able to make the biggest impact? Where are you most likely to make an impact? So it's essentially a decision support system for your content. And that is not available just out of the gate. We need to configure it. So you need to talk to somebody basically to have them set it up. But it's something that I've just been reaching out to people who are interested in just building their domain and the platform and showing them. But it's really powerful because now you can actually, you can have, I'll give you an example. Companies all the time, even a mid-sized company, will spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on their content. Well, how do we build the strategy? How do you determine what you're going to spend your time on? This makes it much more efficient and really speeds you up, but also just gives you better ideas. And so if you use inventory, you're basically building your content strategy in an optimized manner, which ultimately means tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars less wasted. So, less waste, more performance. So just getting the strategy right it makes all the difference, actually.
And inventory can help the publisher plan exactly what they should be targeting in the future for prioritization. Is that kind of what it gets down to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. And that has to be set up manually. So someone a user of MarketMuse would need to contact support and get that set up.
Well, I guess I shouldn't have said that. So if the domain is under 500 pages, you can just go and set that up in the system without talking to anyone. If it's a lot bigger than 500 pages, we only will analyze the first 500 pages. So you can still see something. But if you have thousands of topics and keywords and pages and stuff, at some point you do need to talk to a human. And we're actually think through the course of this year, we're going to be altering that and just removing limits and making it easier. But basically, if your site is ranking for more than 5,000 topics or keywords, you should talk to somebody, because we can actually configure it in a more effective manner. But if it's small, if it's below that, you don't have to talk to us. You can just run those pages and see what the results are.
Okay, that makes sense. And we can move into First Draft, which is a newer addition to the suite. So can you tell us about First Draft a little here?
Yeah, so First Draft is it's really cool. It's basically the ability to build content. The original technology that we built was a topic modeling technology. We generate these knowledge graphs by taking a bunch of articles and distilling it down to an outline. The First Draft technology takes that outline and actually generates written text against that outline. And in our case, we use a brief. So we use first we build a content brief, and then we generate against a brief to build you a 2,000, 3,000 word article generated by a human that answers all of the questions and covers all the topics in the draft. It's still a draft because it's pretty cool, but you still need to edit it and still need to add not just fix errors. There's always some modeling error, of course, but really to give it kind of a point of view, to give it strategy, to customize it. But it really builds the building blocks of the article. And you can actually, when I say building blocks, they're actually blocks of text, 2, 3 sentence paragraphs you can actually drag and drop in the interface. So you put in a topic, and now you have these blocks of text that you can use to assemble an article, then edit it and publish. So it takes a lot of that initial writing out, and it makes you spend more of your time on editorial and strategy versus just writing words that, covering something.
And this kind of functionality has gotten popular with, I have to make sure I say this right, GPT-3. I always want to say those out of order. And for the people that don't know, can you explain what GPT-3 is and why it was a big deal when, last year when a lot of people were talking about it?
It's a huge deal even now, because GPT-3 is the leading technology around basically given a question, give me an answer and write it out. That's basically the form. So it can generate articles, it can generate text, it can generate music, it can generate images, pretty much it can generate spreadsheet, it can write code. You can basically, given a query, help me solve this, it generates stuff. Now it's great for short snippets of text. So you see there are a lot of startups where they basically take a GPT-3 data source API and they visualize it and they give you some additional, for example, if you want to write subject lines for emails, it can use GPT-3 and generate subject line for emails. It's great for a short text. It doesn't work for long text very well, because if you put in a topic like, what types of content strategies could someone build, the machine's just going to write a bunch of words, and it doesn't think. It's not a human yet. Maybe one day it'll be one and the same, but right now it's just basically looking for patterns and kind of trying to predict what people might be interested in, but there's no structure to it. So it's great for short form. Does not work for long form, and we're one of the technologies where you can actually take a question and structure it in a very detailed way and generate around it. And so that's kind of the difference. But we don't use GPT-3 in our system. We built our own, but I use GPT-3 just for fun because it's amazing. It can do so many things and give you quick answers to things, and just write stories, and it's awesome. I recommend anybody. You can go to beta.openai.com and just sign up for GPT-3 there and get an API key for free. So I recommend everyone check it out.
And I was gonna ask you about not using GPT-3, but it's an API, right? GPT-3, and
Hmm?
you could sign up, like you said. So do you have to code it and access the API? So you're doing some pretty technical heavy stuff to
No,
check it out?
no, it's easy. I haven't coded anything. I just code, they have a sandbox and you pick a type of query. So let's say, give 2 sentence horror stories. And it says, okay, like give me a word or a phrase. And I say, okay, I don't know, living in Brooklyn. And then it'll write you a 2 sentence horror story about living in Brooklyn on the spot. It's awesome. But yeah, there's no coding required. There's some like dials you can fiddle with, but you don't have to touch those. You just press the button.
Okay. I'll have to play with it because I haven't yet. In fact, obviously, with the question I just asked, I haven't even looked at what is available out there, but I did check out the MarketMuse blog where you compared first draft to GPT-3 and Snazzy AI was the comparison. Stephen on your content team wrote that, or I don't know his exact role, but Stephen wrote that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
Content strat.
yeah, can you talk about like the comparison if you happen to remember? I could fill in some gaps, but
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, we have an article about glucagon as a non-invasive diabetic treatment. And by the way, I don't know much. I've used this example, but unfortunately, I've never actually read up on what glucagon is. I really should now that I'm talking about it. But essentially, we gave GPT-3 that question, and we gave MarketMuse the question in terms of first draft, and we measured the resulting output, and the quality of what was generated by our engine was multiple orders of magnitude better in terms of content score, in terms of content comprehensiveness as measured by our content score. The GPT-3 version came out as like a 3, and ours came out as 40. And ours obviously correlates to ranking and working as business writing, because that's everything that we do. So essentially, GPT-3 did generate an answer to the question, but it wasn't very good. And so you had to take those pieces and edit it and spend a lot of time adding value to that article, to the point where if you're writing long form text, why even do that? It's just better to just write it. And so it just doesn't work for that use case. And the first draft does. And it's pretty well. I won't say it works every single time. It's still early technology, but we have customers generating hundreds of articles a month, maybe over thousands now, using the AI, and it actually just in practice works better. So it's just we took a different approach, and it solves this problem more effectively. So that's what the article is about.
and we'll link up to that if people want to get some of the details. But I think one of the big things, and you kind of laid out this thread for us in the last couple answers. So if someone were to use the Brief app to get their outline and know exactly what needed to be in that piece of content for that topic, and then you feed that to First Draft, then you end up with a comprehensive piece of content that you want, versus if you're using something like Snazzy AI, there's maybe a couple templates, and I tested it out because I hadn't used Snazzy before. And I'm pretty sure I set a couple things up wrong, but I looked for some short form content on their text expander, which is what you guys used in the example in the blog post.
Mm-hmm.
And the sample output was terrible. It was basically taking a sentence or two from what I could tell and threw in like other people's names, and someone was running a webinar and some other stuff. So it completely was off for what I was trying to get. So I may have to see what's going on, because I imagine it's somewhat useful, Snazzy that is, but I just had very poor results when I tested it out. So no question there. Mainly I was saying if you use the Brief app and then feed that into First Draft, you end up with comprehensive topics, and you cover the things you need to cover.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Terrible question as an interviewer, but that is just want to tighten a bow for people.
You got it. And the I think the important part of what you just said is everybody should go out and try this stuff. It's not very expensive. It's not very hard. You really don't have to code at all. You have to sign up. Maybe in the case of MarketMuse, when you sign up, I believe today we give you a free content credit. You have, but our first drafts cost 2 credits, so you have to buy another credit. I would think in the future we are going to drop the price and drop the entry point to that. But essentially, you just need to, if you're out a small amount of money, maybe to try it, but it's really more the value of your time is the biggest cost. Of course, we're all managing, but just try a couple of solutions, see what's out there. Maybe there are some public examples, and just play with it because it's really the technology is evolving rapidly, and the hard part is understanding the use cases. Like, okay, that's cool in general, but how am I going to use that to solve this particular problem I'm facing? And I can tell you, if you have a content or an SEO problem that or demand gen problem you're trying to solve, as long as it's inbound, we have something that can help. But there are other. You're going to need to use a number of different solutions cobbled together. So it's just you just have to kind of be a hacker and kind of play with it and just have fun with it.
With first drafts, you mentioned and emphasized that you're going to have to go through, and it is a first draft, and you're going to have to edit it. Where are most of the mistakes? Is it some of the topics that are in there? Or is it some grammatical things? If you could generalize.
The biggest input or the biggest factor is what topic did you choose? So if I put the word bat, the system it has no idea what I'm trying to do. But if I put something like long form content, natural language generation for demand gen in the hospitality industry, that's great. So the more specific, not it's the solution is not always just to use longer and longer strings, so queries. So that's just an example, but you just really want to think through the intent, and then you want to pick your subheadings, because when you go through this process, you have the opportunity to take that topic and break it down into a number of subheadings, H2s. So you want to pick your H2 strategically as well. And if you do both of those, your chances go up of getting a good generation go up quite a bit. And if you do those well and the generation doesn't work, just contact us and we'll fix it, because sometimes the machine is just there's modeling error. So if you've done all the steps right and the output's not good, let us know and we will fix it somehow.
And if a person were to use briefs, then your subheadings and the outline should be pretty tight on what you need to cover, right?
Yes. Yeah, okay. That should be so tight that what I would recommend to get the absolute best quality output is you build the brief, you go in, you edit the brief, so you can select and unselect the questions and the topics, just really edit it thoroughly. And then when you're satisfied, lock it down, save and finish, and then generate the first draft on top of that. You can skip that step and just put in a topic and go write the first draft, and we'll build the brief. But then we're going to generate the draft based on the brief we're given. And the biggest factor is basically the higher quality, the more specific the brief, the better the generation is.
How long does it take to run a brief and get the output?
Right now, to just get the output, 2-3 minutes. So you pick a topic, it starts downloading a bunch of content, generates some subheading suggestions. You lock those in, and within a couple minutes, or maybe 2-3 minutes, you've got that brief. Then you edit it. I typically tell folks this takes 5 to 20 minutes, depending on everything, depending on how detailed you want to be. But you have that editing step. You click the button, get a first draft. Right now, it's a 12 to 24 hour turnaround. I can see a future where it's basically immediate. I think a CTO would have a cow if I said that, because there's a lot of steps involved, and we generate and regenerate, and we do a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes. But there's no technological reason why it shouldn't be really, really, really fast after that point. So you could have written content within, I don't know, 30 minutes. One day we'll have content within 30 minutes or less. The Domino's guarantee, but we don't have that yet. Right now
Okay.
it's 24 hours
24 hours. Okay. And
at the moment.
why does it take so long? As someone who's uninformed, hamsters are running in the wheels back there. Like, why so long?
Yeah, because we're taking those sections, we're taking the inputs from the brief, those hundreds of topics and questions, and then the underlying articles and the underlying understanding of your site that we use to inform the style and tone. There's a whole bunch of inputs we take, and then we keep generating and regenerating content, and we run every generated block through a number of automated tests, and we're looking at similarity. Is it similar but different from the other generations, and how interesting it is. It obviously plagiarizing something, so that when you Google that text, it should not come up as a block of text. It should be new. I mean, it might coincidentally, but it shouldn't be all over the place. We're not ripping content off the web. It should be interesting and informative, but not too detailed. And so we're basically running a lot of quality checks, typical NLG quality checks. And if it fails one of the filters, we throw that block out, and then we generate a new block, and we keep running these processes. And it's not just generating individual blocks in isolation. It's actually looking at kind of how are you telling the story, using that brief as a guide. So we're basically just generating pieces, fitting them together, and then when we have something that fits together in the whole way, then the process finishes. So that's the engineering process. Practically speaking, right now, most of the time, probably your request is waiting in a queue, just because of the machines involved to run this stuff. And we have some pretty powerful machines that we rent, but and we have our own model. So kind of like Open AI GPT-3, we have our own engines and our own models that we train, but there's just processing power required. So as we build it out better and get some engineering efficiencies, it'll just be less time waiting in a queue to get processed and less faster processing time. That's all. And I would say it's already dropped from a couple of days down to 24, then it'll probably drop to 12. And then, once you've built something and you're just optimizing the engineering, it tends to get better very, very quickly. So I wouldn't be surprised if at some point soon it'll take an hour or something, and then it just gets faster and faster.
That's a fair answer. I mean, there's a lot of computing power behind it, so that totally makes sense. As far as some of the configuration that you can set up, can you get it to match the tone of how I normally write, for example, or make it a more casual or business-like piece of content for first draft?
We try to auto configure those style and tone especially if you have a domain in our system, we will use content from the domain to try to configure that. Right now, you don't have any settings that you can fiddle with. In OpenAI, you do, but they're kind of basic. There's a temperature setting, which is interesting. I forgot exactly what that is. It's not it's not what you think. It's so there are some things, but not really. So that's really at the end of the day, with the current product, the current settings, the tone and style are really mostly up to you and the strategy of the article. So, for example, if we're using glucagon and you're talking about non-invasive diabetic treatments, if your company sells some treatments but doesn't sell others, you just really want to focus on what you actually do. You don't want to be just an academic resource, and you're not a school on, you're not medical school. So your goal is different, unless you are, but usually you're not, right? So you really want to just focus on your unique differentiation, and telling that story really comes from your head, from your brain. You understand your differentiation much better than any machine will. So you've got to inject that.
Where do you see the AI trend in some of the things that you're working on and other companies in the industry in general going, say, in the next 1 to 2 years?
Great question. A couple of couple of things, but I think the biggest is just making this stuff more accessible. Because let's kind of rewind the tape, and we're all, if we're listening to this, you are absolutely a specialist on a global level. Of the 9+ billion people, you are one of the few that focuses on this, relative few out of millions. But as am I. But essentially, there. So if I were to start, let's say I were to start a new company, what would I do? I'd want to build a product and all that, but I'd want to build content. Why? Because inbound is much more efficient than outbound, uh, in most cases. In some cases, if you go to a conference, you meet some people, great. But for the most part, in terms of building a content asset that is a sustainable competitive advantage, content is almost always a good idea, right? Well, how do you do that? You're going to be at different levels of maturity. And one of my favorite tools on our site is our maturity model. We haven't made a big thing about it yet, but it's on the site, and everyone should just, if you're listening to this, go through and kind of evaluate yourself, and you'll see that everybody by nature is just at a different level of maturity, different levels of capabilities, and we want to just drop that bar. We want to make it easier and easier and easier to climb that maturity curve and to get into more and more advanced content and SEO stuff, because we just believe in the mission of inbound and content just being a better tool, or better approach. So I've basically, I want to be kind of specific enough to answer your question, but essentially just finding more and more ways to drop the cost, make it easier, make the software simpler, make it easier to configure, easier to understand, make it more powerful, make it faster, but just get it out there more, because in 10, 15, 20 years, maybe 5 years, a lot more people will be AI writing than they are today. And we're one of the early leaders in this, but it's just going to be a long evolution. So just making it accessible and easy. That's the very long way of explaining. Just accessible, easy to understand, easy to see the value. That's the biggest thing.
Have you thought about if your underlying engine works so well that it ends up being, one of the most valuable portions of the company? And I don't know if I have a complete thought with that, but have you thought of it? I mean, it is performing really well compared to some of the other technology that we're able to check out at this point.
Yes, yeah, and we've spent over 3 years building this thing. So we've been working on this problem for some time, with real researchers and engineers and engineering effort applied to it. So it's a big part of our strategy, absolutely. The problem we're solving is basically, gosh, I know I want to write all these topics and I could stand to gain so much, but I just don't have the time or the resources to actually get all that content done. So it's really an execution challenge that our customers have, and that's why we built it. So it's not, is somebody going to go in and just generate 10,000 articles and suddenly they're ranking for everything? That's not, it could happen, I guess, but that's not how, I mean, it would take a pretty concerted effort to do that, although technically it is possible, of course. But for the most part, it's just going to solve a lot of people's headaches around, okay, how do I get those like 2 articles out this week? Look at my calendar. Oh, my writer's sick. Like, how do I just like get this out? And by the way, the automation performs much better when there's human thinking applied to it. So the more smart writers and editors and content people and SEO analysts, and the more people you have looking at it, and agency helping, the more sophisticated your output will be and the better it will perform. So you actually need more humans. I'm just competing against, I feel that I'm just competing against paid and outbound sales, like those like BDRs dialing, hey, like, I think you need Oracle right now. It's like, get out of here. When I want Oracle, I'm going to read about Oracle, and you'll know because I'll be on your site, getting that white paper. Nothing against Oracle, obviously huge company, but that outbound BDR thing, I think is just going to it's not going to grow. It's not a great place to put dollars, and you can spend a lot of dollars on that. Instead of doing that, and instead of doing just a bunch of PPC, just you have to invest in organic and SEO. It would be crazy not to.
And a couple other things, just sort of wrapping it up towards the end here. I know you have an agency program and an affiliate program that are kind of new. Can you give us some background on that?
Yes, so affiliate is rolling out pretty soon. We're using a platform called Partner Stack to power it. Great company as well. And you'll basically be able to sign up. We're going to be featured in Partner Stack has a marketplace, so you can go there, or it'll be on our site. You can sign up and generate an affiliate code and just drive referrals that way and manage the codes and the payments, and it'll just be simple. So that should be rolling out. It's easy for me to give estimates because I'm not the one actually implementing it, but within a few weeks, I think. Right now it's March, so in March 2021, affiliate program coming at some point. So that'll be really cool. And then the agency program, we don't have this on our site in detail yet, but one day we will. Essentially, because the highest level of MarketMuse is the domain analysis, where that decision support system, agencies love using that, but today you would have to buy a separate license for every domain, and we have an agency pricing model where you don't have to do that, but it's not implemented yet. So essentially, when it's an agency, if you want to look at even just one domain, your own or somebody else's, but if you want to look at all your clients, if you want to look at prospects of sites where you want to pitch a site, you can actually analyze and get a AI topical content audit in MarketMuse. And we have a way of making that so you don't have to buy a license every single time you want to do that. And then eventually, we don't have the ability to manage multiple domains in the system right now. You can't set them up, but eventually we want to have the functionality so you can set up domains, do a quick little audit, get some insights, pitch that client, sell the deal, pass the MarketMuse cost through to them, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those are just things we're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, tons of stuff going on over there. Where can people find you, Aki?
Oh, I'm just Aki at marketmuse.com is my email. Aki Balogh, Twitter handle. I'm on LinkedIn, Aki, Balogh. It's my last name, Balogh. Any of those work. And I'm also, sometimes I'm on Drift. You can ask for me if you go to our site, go to Drift. Hey, can I talk to Aki? Here's my question. Just let me know what the question is, and then someone will route it to me somehow.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links for everything, and thanks so much for spending so much time with me today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks everyone for listening. This is it's been 7-8 years, but we're just part of the way there. So there's a lot more to come.